Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod. Welcome back to episode number 84. Guys, this summer, I keep saying it every week because it feels like it, but really we're in the thick of things now in the summer. I hope you guys are all enjoying some nice family time with friends, time outdoors. Although for those who are on, I think it's the East Coast and the Midwest and just extreme heat waves in the United States, so be safe out there. But yeah, guys, summer is a fun time, and we have some fun things to discuss. I watched F1, so we're going to discuss that in today's episode. I also watched the first 3 episodes of Ironheart, so we're going to talk about that as well. Some new trailers, Fantastic Four First Steps. A lot of fun stuff. So before we get into any of that, because we want to dive into the topics as soon as we can, if you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters or Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, make sure to do so if that's where you are watching the podcast. Thank you so much. Leave a comment down below with what you think about the episode. Leave a like. And if you're interested, the audio-only platforms, we have it on Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and Spotify as well, so make sure to check it out there. The podcast is released first on those platforms Saturday mornings in the United States. But guys, thank you so much for the support. We just recently hit 1,800 subscribers, on the road to 2,000, hopefully by New Year's 2026, so that would mean the world to me. Thank you guys so much for your support. It really just means so much. It's been so much fun to be able to post every single day and talk to you guys, just really converse and enjoy what you guys have to say. So with all that out of the way, guys, let's get into today's topics. Alrighty, guys, James Gunn, the co-CEO of DC and the upcoming director and writer of Superman, which I'm pretty excited about and I'm looking forward to seeing. James Gunn, though, who also, of course, by the way, directed the 3 Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and he was a big part of Marvel for a time. But James Gunn, he likes to get on social media and clarify things, which I think is a good thing in a sense, right? Because he can debunk rumors and whatnot. But sometimes, unless, these rumors are really heinous and you want to defend cast members and people and, things like that, obviously, I'm all in favor of that. But sometimes I feel like James Gunn puts himself in a position where he feels like he has to clarify everything. And sometimes it's just maybe not worth talking about certain things that just don't really matter until we see a trailer or until we see the premise of a movie or something like that. Case in point, what we're about to talk about here has to do with Clayface. Now, last week, we talked about Clayface because the DCU film in 2026 is coming out soon, and it has just officially, or almost officially, cast its lead with Tom Rhys-Harris. And we discussed the idea that, maybe Tom Rhys-Harris is playing the base human for Clayface, but there are certainly possibilities for other actors to step in that role as well, just given the nature of the shape-shifting, just his shape-shifting powers, right? So it makes sense if other people are playing Clayface as well. So then, people pointed that out on Threads, right? And they asked James Gunn questions about, okay, so what about the fact that you said, right, you said in an earlier comment about the DCU and casting that generally people who voice those characters, people who voice the characters in animation are going to then play the characters in live action, like how Frank Grillo is playing Rick Flag Sr. in Creature Commandos, Superman, and Peacemaker Season 2. And so James Gunn then went to clarify that he said the DC would, quote, plan on using primary actors wherever they can, right? Because Alan Tudyk was the voice of Clayface in Creature Commandos, though I don't even think he had many lines. He also was the voice of Dr. Phosphorus. And Alan Tudyk is, I would say at this point in his career, I mean, I personally, because I know he's done live action roles, but I know him more for his voices, right, than anything else. And I think that Alan Tudyk is one of those actors that James Gunn likes, and a lot of people in the industry like to use as fill-ins for voices wherever they can. And so I never took it as an indication that Alan Tudyk would be playing 3 different characters, because he was also someone else in Creature Commandos. We talked about this a while ago, where he was going to be playing 3 different voice roles, and I never took that as an indication of Alan Tudyk, playing many different DCU characters in live action. And so that's all fine. But then James Gunn continued on, and he had this to say, and this is just, to me, this is to be honest with you, this is where I say, James, you didn't need to say this, because now I don't know what's going on. I think this is, in my opinion, just in my personal opinion, James Gunn trying to be a little too cute and a little bit too coy, when in reality he just didn't need to say this, because he then followed up and said, quote, I've also never said if the 2 characters are the same. Parentheses, I've also never said they're not. Okay, so, first of all, is there a distinct possibility that the Clayface in Creature Commandos and the Clayface in the upcoming Clayface movie are not the same person. There are just two Clayfaces running around in the DCU. I suppose so. I don't know if it's a situation in the comics where I don't think so, right? Nobody's been talking about this, where you have two Spider-Men running around with Miles Morales and Peter Parker, or two Ant-Men with Hank Pym and Scott Lang, or, multiple, I don't know about the DC equivalent, multiple Green Lanterns. I don't know if it's the same. I don't think so. It seems like the Tom Rhys-Harries version of the character is Basil Carlo. That it's that version of the character. So, I mean, sure, there could be two different Clayfaces, but my question is why? Because, look, I get it that DC is operating different than Marvel, and I know a lot of people want to say, and people have been telling me in the comments, no, DC is going to be completely isolated, the different projects can be isolated from one another. Again, it's not a positive or a negative thing. It's just looking at things how they are. And a newsflash is that the first few projects of the DCU are very interconnected, insofar as Superman, right? Supergirl is in Superman. And Frank Grillo, I just talked about Frank Grillo's Rick Flag Sr. is going to be in all the projects, right? Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner is going to be in 3 of the 4 upcoming projects. So, no, I mean, it is what it is. The DCU is still going to be interconnected. And I don't understand what James Gunn's comment is meant to allude to here, because honestly, what I think he's doing here is he's trying to say, oh, Alan Tudyk's voicing him in Creature Commandos, but why we cast a different actor? Why do we do that? Because the most simple explanation for it is just that they wanted a different actor than Alan Tudyk, who is a great voice actor, probably not the person they wanted in live action, so they cast Tom Rhys-Harries. Lo and behold, people are like, why'd you do that? And James Gunn is like, I don't know. I mean, I never said they weren't the same person. I also never said they were. And now it's like, what? Why? Why did we do that? Honestly, I think this is much ado about nothing. I'm only making this segment because I suppose there is a possibility that James Gunn just hinted at the fact that there are 2 different Clayfaces in the DCU. Also, the possibility that this DCU film is Elseworlds, which I guess has never been explicitly stated or not stated. Again, it's all confusing, and I feel like James Gunn, this is one of those moments where I enjoy most of the times when he debunks things and he confirms things, and it's fun, right? But honestly, sometimes I'm like, what? Did we need to go here? So, I don't know. This is just something where we'll file this under, I guess James Gunn said it, and then move on and see what happens. When we get an official trailer, we get an official confirmation and all that good stuff. Guys, what do you make of James Gunn's comments that maybe there are 2 different Clayfaces? Maybe the Clayface in Creature Commandos is not the same as the one that's going to be in the film in 2026. Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, it feels like it's been a while since we've talked about everyone's favorite non-existent MCU project, Blade. So let's talk about Blade, as Mahershala Ali is doing press for Jurassic World Rebirth, a film that I'm actually quietly excited for. And also, we have some comments from David S. Goyer, who was one of the writers for, I believe it was Blade, was he for all 3 Blade films? I may be wrong. Maybe, I remember Blade Trinity, he definitely was a writer for. And in fact, you know what it is? I'm looking now at his page. He was the director and writer for Blade Trinity, but he also wrote Blade 1 and Blade 2. And we're going to talk about his writing credits in just a second, because I think it's quietly fascinating, to be honest with you. But anyways, let's that all aside. So David S. Goyer has also been making comments about Blade, and I think that all of this it's interesting, right? And I wanna kind of just dive into what these different people are saying about the status of Blade, because I don't know, is there something to glean here? Is Blade back on track? Maybe? We'll see. So here's what we know. Mahershala Ali, according to The Hollywood Reporter, said he doesn't know where Marvel is at right now for Blade. That's a direct quote from me. He says, quote, I'm just reading from the direct that the direct is quoting The Hollywood Reporter. He says, quote, I don't know where Marvel is at right now. I would love for Blade to happen. We'll see. So it seems very non-committal, and it seems like, we don't know what's going on with Blade, and that's fair, right? And when I said earlier that, could Blade be back on track, that doesn't mean that Blade's coming out next year, right? It just means, could there still be traction for Blade? Is Blade dead, really, is the question at this point. My answer a couple months ago would have been, yeah, I definitely think so. But Mahershala Ali might just be saying that to be nice, but it's not nothing, right? So there's that. And then paired with David S. Goyer's comments. So this is interesting, right? Because he was, I don't know what he was doing. He was doing an interview or something. And this is what he had to say about the whole Blade situation. quote, "It's so funny, about 8 months ago, when not the latest hiccup hit, but the prior hiccup." So this is just for context, because Blade has gone through so many different writers. I think he's talking about the fact that they just let go of their writers recently and whatnot. So he's saying before that, because before that they, I think, let go of the writers as well, and maybe even let go of the director. So to say that, in setting up the timeline, when David S. Goyer reached out to Marvel about this, as we're going to talk about, he reached out and they said some things, and then still after that things went haywire and things continued to go wrong, just to set up the timeline here. So anyways, continuing on, when not the latest hiccup hit, but like the prior hiccup, I had so many people that would say to me, "Dude, would you get in there on Blade? Would you just get in there?" Okay, I don't know who's saying that, but anyways, whether it be friends or fans or people on social media, and I wasn't even really thinking about it. But then I had my agent call Marvel and say, "Do you guys need any help?" And they said, "We love you, but we think we've cracked it now, and we're in a good place." And then the latest thing happened. And so, no, they haven't contacted me. So here's some interesting things to take away from this. First of all, David S. Goyer contacting Marvel and being like, "Hey, do you need help with Blade?" That's fine and all. That's great and all. And them being like, "We love you, but we think we've cracked it." So that, to me, first of all, right, that on the surface is the first positive sign of, oh yes, we seem to have cracked Blade, and we're in a good place. But then obviously David S. Goyer is pointing to the fact that, well, then they lost writers again, and it seems like they're back at square one. Mahershala Ali is like, "Yeah, I don't know where Marvel's at." So for David S. Goyer, he's like, "Okay, well, you guys seem to really need help, but you guys rejected it, and you said you were in a good place, but apparently not." To me, honestly, the whole comment from Marvel of, "We love you, but we think we've cracked it, we're in a good place," I'm not out here saying Marvel just lied to him and said, why would they say they've cracked it when they haven't? I also question maybe Marvel thinking, do we want David S. Goyer to be the writer for Blade? Because here's the thing, right? And I'm not throwing shade at David S. Goyer, right? I don't think he's out here saying I'm the best writer ever and why didn't they ask for my help? This segment is mostly about, Marvel and where they are with Blade. And the conclusion I've come to is just that they're stuck. They're still stuck, right? But I think it's important to note the context around David S. Goyer because, when they said we've cracked it and we're in a good place, when clearly they weren't, or maybe they were, but then, things fell apart again, right? Who knows? But I think that maybe has less to do with Blade and maybe more to do with David S. Goyer. Because here's the thing. David S. Goyer has written some really interesting things, and so now we're digging into his writing credits here, right? And I think that it's interesting to look at because he's written films like Blade 1, which was pretty well received. Blade 2 was pretty well received. Then he wrote and directed Blade Trinity, which was a disaster. Now, there have been a lot of stories about that, whether or not that was his fault and Wesley Snipes and whatnot, so we're not going to get into that. Then he writes Batman Begins, which is amazing, and he wrote part of the story for The Dark Knight, and he wrote part of the story for The Dark Knight Rises. Okay, great. He also wrote Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance, which last time I checked was not super well received, but there is that. Then he wrote Man of Steel. I think some of these were with Chris Terrio, by the way. And Man of Steel, I know a lot of people love it. Some people love it. I think it's okay. I think it's good, but not great. And then he wrote Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, which if you've seen my Revisited podcast where I revisited Batman v Superman, I think that film is a mess. I don't think it's atrocious, but I think it's a mess. It's really messy. And then he wrote Terminator, Dark Fate, which I remember people just hated that movie. So, look, on the one hand, you might argue, well, Marvel just needs to get this movie off the ground. They just need to get the movie going. On the other hand, isn't there some pressure to say, maybe for Marvel to say, we want to really get this right? Maybe they just told David S. Goyer, look, we appreciate you reaching out, but we think we're good. I don't know. I'm speculating here. Because to me, honestly, when Marvel says they've cracked it, they clearly didn't, right? And I just think that, this whole situation makes me think, yeah, they probably were just stuck. And they were like, we're not in a place where we need more writers to come into the room unless we really believe that you can fix the script. And I'm not trying to bash David S. Goyer or anything like that. I'm just pointing out the fact that, because he offered to help and they rejected him doesn't mean that they had everything figured out, nor does it mean that David S. Goyer was the one who was going to save Blade. That's all I'm trying to say. Frankly, I don't know who can save Blade at this point. Maybe AARON Sorkin can come in and write Blade. I don't know. But it's an interesting situation. I think that at this point, I would be stunned if Blade, the solo film, is able to come off, is able to come into production at this point for anytime soon. I think really the most realistic scenario for Blade to appear in the MCU is for him to come into the Midnight Suns movie, if that's going to happen, and then people love him, and then they're like, okay, we think we can do something modern day. Because I feel like everything I've heard about Blade is that they're trying to do some gothic origin story kind of film for him, and I don't know. I just don't know if that's the direction that they've been able to crack. So we'll see. We'll see if Mahershala Ali will ever come to the MCU as Blade. Guys, what do you think about this news? First of all, from Mahershala Ali saying that, yeah, I'd be still down for it, but I don't know what's going on. And then also from David S. Goyer, who wrote the 3 previous Blade films, that he said he was interested, and Marvel said, no, we're good. Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, we did a segment about this a few weeks ago when it was reported, that none other than Thunderbolts director Jake Schreier was going to be tapped to direct the upcoming MCU X-Men film, which is arguably one of the most anticipated and perhaps pressure-filled MCU films since Spider-Man Homecoming, since Spider-Man No Way Home. You know, the X-Men are akin to Spider-Man in that they are part of Marvel's crown jewels in terms of their canon and their characters, right? You can talk about Iron Man and Captain America and Thor, but really, those characters pale in comparison to Spider-Man and the X-Men, for example. So, it's a big deal. And we did a segment a while ago talking about how, yes, I'd be very excited to see Jake Schreier direct the X-Men film, the upcoming X-Men film. He directed Thunderbolts. I really like Thunderbolts. And since then, what we've seen is that Thunderbolts has quietly kind of bombed at the box office. Bombed not in the sense of making $50 million or even $50, but making about $370 million, which for an MCU film, and especially an MCU film that was well received, is a pretty big disappointment. However, it's worth pointing out, and I think this has always been true of Marvel, is that once Kevin Feige works with a director that he enjoys, once Kevin Feige finds the talent, they keep them in the Marvel family. And I think that that's a really good thing, because you start collecting, and I say collecting, it's, not like they're actually collecting directors like Infinity Stones, but you start, having a collection of directors that are ready and willing and able to direct MCU films that are amazing, that are standout, that are noteworthy and exemplary. Just look at the Infinity Saga and the kinds of directors that became a part of the Marvel family. RYAN Coogler is an outstanding, amazing director. James Gunn directed the Guardians of the Galaxy films, and I think he did quite well. Joss Whedon was like that before all of those things that came out about him later on, but then you had the Russo brothers, the 2 Captain America films that led to Avengers Infinity War, Endgame, and now Doomsday and Secret Wars, right? You have Peyton Reed, who, yes, this isn't, it's not 100% hit rate, because Peyton Reed directed Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and that didn't do so well. So it's not like every single time it works out. Same with Taika Waititi for Thor Ragnarok and Thor Love and Thunder, but they have a deep bench of talent. And it's interesting because while people have not enjoyed Phase 4 and Phase 5 and now upcoming Phase 6 as much as I think, they would have liked, myself included, even though I don't hate Phase 4 and Phase 5. In fact, I quite like Phase 4, and I think Phase 5 has some good things in there. The bench, I think, is actually still there. It's still growing. Case in point, the directors of Moon Knight, even though Moon Knight was not my favorite MCU show, went on to direct a lot of Daredevil Born Again. And I think that while Daredevil Born Again as a show was pretty uneven, I liked them as a directing duo a lot. Same thing with Destin Daniel Cretton, who was originally going to direct Avengers Kang Dynasty, and now is directing Spider-Man Brand New Day. John Watts, who has been quietly making brilliant MCU film after brilliant MCU film in the Spider-Man trilogy, is part of that roster as well. And so now you can add Jake Schreier to the list, because I think Kevin Feige is smart enough to know that box office in this case does not equal the quality of the film, right? I think it's a little bit different when you have characters, for example, like, oh, should we do a Thor 5, even though, we have a really good director? I think that's a little bit of a different scenario versus a director, because I don't think the directors are as visible per se, right? Maybe, I wouldn't be surprised if Marvel took another shot to make another film with Chloe Zhao, even though Eternals bombed in terms of box office and critically, even though I love Eternals, I think it's great. But Chloe Zhao is a visionary director. And so Jake Schreier being a part of this, I think it makes total sense that he would direct the X-Men film. All that to say is that this has been something that's been circling around, and I think it's a great idea. And recently, about a week ago, Variety put out a sort of a newsletter article, and in the Variety article, they basically talked about a lot of different things, and it was just a throwaway line in there, which is why I didn't cover it initially, because I was like, it doesn't feel like a whole story. Maybe they did a throwaway line because they had already broken the news that Jake Schreier was going to be the director of Thunderbolts, but there was no official confirmation. So I was like, it would just be a repeat segment. Why would I do that? But the reason we're doing this segment now is because Black Panther director promoting Ironheart, RYAN Coogler, the executive producer of Ironheart, I think has confirmed it. Now, I think there is a chance that he maybe didn't confirm it actually, but let's just hear what he has to say. So he was promoting Ironheart, and somebody asked him, because he was a fan favorite to direct the X-Men film, again, the Marvel bench of talent, right? He's definitely somebody I would have loved to have seen direct the X-Men film. And he said, quote, "I'm not doing it. Jake is doing it. Jake is directing that," is what he said. That's his direct quote. Jake Schreier. Now, the possibility that he that this is not an official confirmation comes from the idea that maybe he also had just been hearing things from social media and from the trades, and he took that as confirmation. Maybe he's not talking to Kevin Feige all the time, even though he is executive producing Ironheart, and he is I guess, going to make Black Panther 3 sometime in the near future. So it seems hard to believe that he wouldn't know about these kinds of things, but maybe he's just disconnected and he saw something on Instagram. Again, those Instagram posts are flying around, like, confirmed, Jake Schreier is directing the X-Men film. And maybe he saw it and he was like, yeah, no, Jake's doing that. And what this does confirm is that he's not doing it, because if he was doing it, I don't know why he'd say something like that. So RYAN Coogler is definitely not directing the X-Men film. But I think Occam's razor, right? What's the simplest explanation for this? The simplest explanation for this is simply that he knows, and that he thought it was just confirmed, a done deal, and he has come out and said Jake Schreier is directing the X-Men film. So I would put this, now, because we have the Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, Variety, they all reported that Jake Schreier was directing Thunderbolts, and that is about 85% certainty, right? It's not official. It's not like Marvel has put out a press release, but it's about 80 to 85 to even 90% official, I would say. RYAN Coogler saying this, I would put it at 95. We're not there yet. I don't even know, will we do another segment when they officially announce it? I hope that comes with other announcements about the X-Men movie. I think it will, with casting and whatnot. That might not be for another year or so. But, I think we're almost there. I think we're almost ready to say officially Jake Schreier is directing the X-Men. There's just a very small part of me that goes, maybe there was a misunderstanding. So we will have to see about that. Guys, what do you think about this quote-unquote confirmation from RYAN Coogler that Jake Schreier is directing the X-Men movie for the MCU? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, in just under a month, the Marvel Cinematic Universe returns with what I think could be the project that has the most promise. Now, at the beginning of the year, I was fairly sure that Thunderbolts was going to be the surest bet in terms of quality. I just had a feeling that Thunderbolts was going to be the film that I think people could reliably see as entertaining and as fun, and I think our predictions came true in that respect. But Fantastic Four First Steps has a different quality to it. It has an intangible it factor to it, something that WandaVision had when I first saw those trailers, or Thor Ragnarok, something different that it brought to the comic book movie space. And I think Fantastic Four First Steps has that. And I wasn't expecting another trailer, to be quite honest with you, but we're getting a final trailer. And honestly, as I say many times, when we get this close to the release of a movie or show and they release more marketing, I'm very hesitant to watch it. I keep to the rule very, very strictly that I don't watch more than the actual trailers. So anything that's a TV spot or even a tie-in ad, I usually don't watch. I will make the rare exception, though, for something, like a tickets on sale trailer or something like that. And so this is labeled a final trailer. And even then I was like, maybe I just want to skip this one. But I took a look just because, we're doing the podcast and I'm excited for the movie. And so I wanted to check it out. And I'm glad I did. I mean, I saw more in this trailer than, that would be a surprise if I hadn't otherwise. And I'm, obviously going to see the movie regardless. So that's a little bit of a bummer. I mean, in a perfect world, I wouldn't see any trailers. But all that aside, because we don't live in that world, I watched this Fantastic Four First Steps trailer. And this was, I'm sorry, the puns, but this was a fantastic trailer. It really was the best trailer. The first two trailers for this movie, I'm going to be honest, I liked them. And I said as much, right? In fact, when we first saw the teaser, I was like, oh, okay, I was a little worried that, we're going to the 1960s retro vibe, and we hadn't seen the actors gel together. I was a little worried that it just wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to land as well as we hoped it would. And the first trailer, I think, assuaged those fears and made me go, okay, I can see these characters. I can see this world. The second trailer built on that, though I think the second trailer was more of a rehash of the first trailer. And so at this point in time, I love all the individual actors they've gotten, right? Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, Joseph Quinn, and Evan Moss-Backrack, I think, just fantastic choice. Again, no pun intended, this time around. But fantastic choices for the cast, but we hadn't seen a whole lot of them gelling together in scenes. And so what this trailer did is it showed us them and their different dynamics. I love just the different pairings that we see later on in a little bit of a montage. We see Ben and Reed hanging out. We see siblings, right? Sue Storm and Johnny Storm, high-fiving each other. And I think that that's awesome, right? I think we want to make sure that every dynamic within this family feels complex, rich, and realized, and also ones that we can root for. And I think that this trailer shows that, right? I love that. I love the Johnny Ben dynamic. That's something we didn't get in the first two trailers. And I just thought it was so fun and endearing when Johnny's like, say the line, and Ben's like, nope, I don't want to. I love that. I think it's so great. And I love that there is such a joy to this version of the group. I know that the last one, the 2015 version, wanted to be much darker, and I don't think that's a bad thing inherently, right? I think you can definitely do Fantastic Four, and dark and gritty and grounded, and that's totally fine. But this version obviously is going for the colorful version. It's going for the very comic book accurate, almost the meta feel, where the Fantastic Four, they have their own TV show, and so people know them as the Fantastic Four, almost like a band. It's it's not like an organic name like the Avengers, right? It's a very known quantity in that universe, and I think that that's really something that it's a smart move, in my opinion. It's a very smart tactic to go about that way, to introduce these characters for the first time in the MCU, and not even in the MCU yet, just yet, obviously in our world in the MCU, but not in Earth 616 because they're in a different universe. And so I think it's a really great idea. The other thing that really stood out to me, obviously, shots of Galactus. I love Julia Gardner's Shia Ball, Silver Surfer, coming down, and she says something like, I herald the beginning, I herald your end, his beginning. I think she says Galactus' his beginning, and she says, I herald Galactus. It's just so cool. And I think some of the shots of Galactus, and I love the shots later on where they're in space and Reed's like, get us out of here, Ben. You see some of the space action. All the shots, it just looks great. And that leads me to the point I was going to make here, which is that, you have a director like Matt Shakman, who directed a lot of WandaVision, and he's just so assured in his direction. Every shot feels purposeful. Every shot and camera angle and zoom in and pan out feels very purposeful and intentional, right? Nothing feels like a mistake. There are just even shots of what I'm assuming is the Fantastic car, just zipping in and out of the streets, Ben flying, the spaceship, and Johnny flying in the skies, and just the way the camera is framed, the way that the angles are, the way that they're zooming in on the characters, everything feels so purposeful, which I love. Because it shows you just that there is a difference with the director. Look, no offense to any of the other amazing directors that the MCU has. I'm not even talking about the movies I didn't like, just other films. I think that the Russo brothers have this quality where they're able to just make great action, big blockbuster movies. And that is amazing. Winter Soldier aside, I think Winter Soldier had a very, very specific flair to it, even though it was still pretty, dark and gritty. But, somebody like a John Watts as well. John Watts obviously is able to dig into the John Hughes teen comedy aspect very well, but his directing style is just, it blends in well with the story, which, for those specific films, the Spider-Man trilogy and the Avengers films, I think that there is a quality in which they, the directing should not overpower them. I think we saw that with something like a Taika Waititi for Thor: Love and Thunder, and even to a lesser extent Sam Raimi for Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. But I will say that for a film like Fantastic Four First Steps, where you're dealing with that 1960s sort of vibe, it's really important, I think, to have a setting and a tone and a feel that just feels unique and feels settled, but also lively and vibrant. And I think that that's awesome. So I watched this trailer, the shots of Galactus, the shots of Silver Surfer, the shots of all the Fantastic Four, using their powers as well, but also them together as a family. I just think it's awesome. I don't know if maybe the one thing I'll say, I don't know how I feel about the that shot that stitches together all of them looking at their watches at the very beginning, the kind of cross-cutting editing. I don't know if I love that personally, but again, it's just a very minor thing. And an otherwise, I think, amazing trailer. I really think this is the best trailer that they've put out, and I don't necessarily think it's close, to be quite honest with you. So, guys, let me know in the comments down below. Are you more excited about Fantastic Four First Steps after watching this trailer? And what did you think about the trailer itself? And let me know where you're at with Fantastic Four First Steps. Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, I have made it no secret that Ironheart has been a series that hasn't particularly been on my radar. I haven't been super excited about it. Of course, though, I say this with every single show, every single movie, every single anything. Most cases anyways, but I like to give all of them as fair of a chance as I can. I keep an open mind with everything and anything that I go into. So really, even though I'm not looking forward to anything, for example, a particular show or movie, I still really want to go into it hoping that it can be the best that it can be. So Ironheart, that's the attitude that I went in with it. We've talked about it before on the channel many, many times. We did our hopes and predictions, talked about the trailers and whatnot. And so, yeah, I mean, if you want to go check those out, check out my expectations. We'll dive a little bit more into it as we get into the spoiler discussion. But this is going to be, like I just mentioned, a spoiler discussion for Ironheart episodes 1 through 3. So if you have not seen episodes 1 through 3, or if you don't care about spoilers at all, then welcome. Or if you haven't seen Ironheart episodes 1 through 3, I should say, then make sure to save this segment, save the podcast, save whatever medium you are watching or listening on for later once you have. But again, if you don't care about spoilers, or if you have seen those 3 episodes, then welcome. Let's dive right in. Yeah, like I was saying, guys, I mean, I just, it's not that I thought there was anything inherently wrong with the trailers or anything like that. It's just, there was nothing that captivated me. I did like the suit-up sequences that were shown in the trailers. I thought that it was an interesting juxtaposition between magic and tech. I think that that's an interesting route to go, although you kind of have to thread the needle there because those two things, you just could be clashing, right? But I think that that's interesting. And again, I think really the biggest thing for me is that Ironheart was a show that it was filmed in 2022 and it just seemed like it got buried, and it just lost the momentum, I think. There are shows like Daredevil Born Again, which even though it went through the strike and it went through all these rewrites and different things like that, it always felt like it had momentum on its side, even though the end product of the first season of Daredevil Born Again was not my favorite season. It was, in fact, probably my least favorite season of Daredevil that they've done. But still, it just felt like, okay, we have a launching pad. Feels like Marvel has a big belief in it. Ironheart, I mean, by the release strategy of releasing 3 episodes one week and then the next 3 episodes the next week, it just felt like Marvel didn't have a huge belief in this show from the beginning. And that it's just a little concerning when that kind of thing happens. But again, we go into it with an open mind. So like I tried out with The Last of Us, I think towards the end of that season, I want to do this where I used to do a very strict play-by-play where I went through all my notes for every single episode and dove into all the details. And I wanted to still talk about the details. I still took notes and still want to talk about those different things. But I want to be a little more general and kind of treat it like I do with any other review. We'll talk about F1 and do a non-spoiler review of that later on in the podcast. And I just want to have it be a little bit more free-flowing. But we will still talk about each episode in some detail. So overall, Ironheart episodes 1 through 3. My overall impressions of these 3 episodes, again, full spoilers. I think there is promise. I won't say that I loved the 3 episodes. There are things in here that I thought really slowed the pace of what I think the potential of what these 3 episodes could have been. And I think that it really took its time to get going. And while on the surface, for TV shows that may not be a bad thing, especially with, longer seasons of television, right? Even if this show was 9 episodes long versus 6, I think then it would have been a little bit more palatable, right? A little bit more like, okay, take your time, let's get going. But by the next 3 episodes, let's really get going. But because this is essentially the first half of the story, it's a little concerning how long they took to get going. I mean, I think the first 2 episodes, I just think there's a lot of setup going on, and then the payoff later on in episode 3 of finally kind of revealing what's going on with Hood, with Mephisto. Obviously, that's, if it's not Mephisto, I don't know what we're doing here. But again, I think that also the premise of using episodes 2 and 3 to just kind of do one-off heists, I think is fine in concept. Again, if you have 9 episodes, maybe like an Agatha All Along, for example, where each, you can dedicate 4 or 5 episodes to its own individual trial on the Witch's Road, which again, I didn't personally love, but the pacing, if you're going to do that, then go ahead and do it. So I think that, to me, that's really the biggest thing working against the show. I also think, I think some of the characters are more likable than others. I thought the AI with Natalie at first was really off-putting, resurrecting the dead friend and making her an AI. And I think it's a little weird how human-like they made Natalie at the beginning. But I will say, this is one of the elements of the show that really did grow on me. And by the time we get to episode 3, I actually quite like the dynamic between Natalie and Riri. I think that it actually works well, that she glitches out based on the traumatic sequences that are going on around the rest of the episodes. And I think that it works well that she's the one comforting Riri at the end. I like that they have that dynamic. It's different than Tony and Jarvis, for example. I like that she has more of that personality. I like that it is an ethical dilemma that they talk about resurrecting your best friend in a sense. And even the mom has a conversation about, hey, can you resurrect, your stepdad? And it's like, whoa, yeah, what are the ethical implications of this? What's going on with all of the ethics and really the morality behind the situation of resurrecting your dead friend via AI. It's tricky, right? So again, at first I was a little not off-put, but thrown off. That's what I was trying to say with the Natalie situation, especially because they started the entire show with that little montage sequence of her and Natalie, and I was like, okay, what's going on here? It seems interesting, but that is part of the show that really grew on me. Again, first couple episodes, I think the first episode is good enough as an introductory episode. There is one pet peeve I have of the show thus far that I'll, not even a pet peeve, just something that I think sticks out to me in a negative way. Because pet peeve implies like, it's just something that annoys me. It doesn't really annoy me. It's just something that I'm like, yeah, I don't know if they did a great job with this. But before we get to that, I mean, I like at the beginning how she's in MIT. I feel like that was a little bit condensed. It felt a little bit too short. Almost felt like she could have spent maybe one entire episode at MIT before she gets kicked out. It felt a little bit too condensed. But I like, again, one of the things that I really wanted for the show to do was really stay in its roots in Chicago. Doing it fine so far. I feel like we don't have that same sense of place and people as we did with Jersey City and Kamal Khan's family and friends in that show. I feel like that show really tried to invest in those relationships and in that setting, at least for the first 4 episodes. Because obviously in episodes 5 and 6, or 4 and 5, we just kind of go off on a side quest for a little bit to Pakistan. But still, I mean, I really liked what they did in that show with Jersey City. And I think that they're doing an okay job of that here with Riri in Chicago with her friends and family. And I don't think the supporting cast and the supporting characters are as memorable here as they were with Kamala's family and Kamala's friends. But, I mean, I love Kamala's family, by the way. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's unfair to compare the two. Maybe they're trying to go for 2 different things. But it's hard not to compare them because, we're going for similar ages, right? That they're 2 young Avengers type characters and returning home and having adventures and whatnot. So, I don't know. That's something that occurs to me here. But, yeah, I mean, we have the introduction here where she goes to find Joe, who is revealed to be Ezekiel Stain. That's something that I think we had heard, rumored, or confirmed a long while ago. And lo and behold, that is something that is confirmed later on. I do like because, I mean, I think, and who knows, right? Maybe Ezekiel Stain is one of the villains of the show that we just don't know about. It's definitely possible that there's a big random turn that, and not random, but, for now it seems like it would be random if he turns into a villain, because I actually really quite like the setup that they have going on with Ezekiel Stain of how he saw his father, and you're like, okay, brace yourselves for that quintessential villain arc of my father was killed by Tony Stark, and I'm out for revenge for him trying to kill Tony Stark. Which, by the way, I'm saying that it's quintessential, it's classic, it's cliche. Doesn't mean it doesn't work, right? It could very easily have worked, but I like the angle that they're playing here a little bit, where he's like, no, I don't want to be anything like my father. I think the most amusing line of the entire show thus far was when Riri is like, what's this? And he's like, that's my dad. Be careful with my dad. And you're like, oh my gosh, those are the ashes of Jeff Bridges' Obadiah Stane. That's crazy. So yeah, I'm curious to see where we go from here. I did think that Alden Ehrenreich, being that kind of bumbling, weird character of Joe towards the beginning of this series, was a little off-putting. But then as we get to know more about him later on in episodes 2 and 3, him being revealed as Ezekiel Stain, I'm like, okay, I can see where this is going. I'm getting a little bit more on board with it, right? I'm getting a little bit more on board with it. Let's talk about, though, because again, I mean, episode 2 was perhaps probably my least favorite, where they're just going and doing the tunnel side quest, and then episode 3 with the greenhouse is fine. I think episode 3 is the best, but I don't love the side questing here. I mean, it's not side questing. I know that they're committing crimes and whatnot. And there's going to be a big point to this with Parker and the Hood, and there are moments, right? For example, again, I do think actually the CGI is pretty good for Ironheart. I do like the suit designs a lot. I think that they're really cool. I didn't love them as much in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, the suit design itself. Although it wasn't like, something that just completely destroyed the movie for me or anything like that. So, but I do like the suits here a lot more. They feel very tactical. They feel very metal. And I think for when you're dealing with vibranium or nanotech or whatnot, it just feels very magic-y, science fiction-y, if you will. And I think that it's working a lot better in this show thus far. But let me get to the one big thing that is sort of holding the show back a little bit for me. We talked about the pacing a little bit. We talked about how, it's still taking a little bit of time to get going, obviously. We have that tease at the end that we'll get to at the very end of this segment. But really, for me, what it is I don't know why they rushed Riri Williams so quickly into criminal activity. it seems like something that might be a little bit small. And maybe if the show took its time, and again, these are my points of reference thus far. It's what's on top of my head. So forgive me for comparing the same 20 shows and the same 20 movies to each other all the time. But let's just say you have a scenario like The Penguin, where Vic, right? Vic, you understand because the show takes such care to build up that character of Vic to somebody who would commit crimes for Oz. I don't get that at all with Riri Williams. Because again, I'm not saying it's just because, she was in Wakanda, she was a good guy, and we know she's a younger. No, nothing like that. But again, maybe subconsciously that's affecting my perception, but I really do think a big part of it is just that they rushed her into this so quickly. Riri Williams, thus far in the MCU, and I'm talking Black Panther Wakanda Forever, I'm also talking the beginning of the show as well. Nothing to me indicates I'm desperate enough to go and just become a criminal. I can see I'm desperate enough to, hang out with somebody like Zeke, I guess. That's what we're calling him, Ezekiel Stain. Even though I do think it's a little convenient that she's like, I'll just sit in the car with a black market dealer that I don't know anything about. That's kind of crazy. But, I can see something like that. I don't know if I buy immediately jumping into, I'm fine with being a criminal. And I get it, means to an end. I totally get. One of the things I actually really like about these first 3 episodes is the motif of money. Because I think that that's super interesting. Like what money means to people and how it can, it's a very powerful thing to prove a point, right? They're, the rich they have so much money and what these, these characters, right? Like Parker and like Riri are like, we don't have the same resources as these rich billionaires like Tony Stark and like the people that they're committing crimes against. And I think that's a super interesting motif. To push Riri as far as becoming a criminal and joining this gang, I don't know if I buy it. And I think that to me is always lingering in the back of my mind of, it feels like we're missing 2 episodes here where you develop that, like Vic, again, it took Vic a long time to fully commit to being a part of Oz's gang. And I don't see that with Riri. Eventually she's got to come out and become a good guy, right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's my own preconceived notion of what I'm expecting from the show, but I don't know how or why they can justify her just suddenly turning to this lifestyle. I get that she wants to get out, but she's just in it. And I do like, again, to do a 180, I guess, and play devil's advocate, I do like at the end that she straight up killed somebody. And they don't just skip by that. That is harrowing. That is awful. I mean, imagine being, how old is she? 19, 20 in the show? I mean, that is crazy. She just killed somebody. I mean, maybe she killed a couple people from Telecon in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I don't know. But, just to really explore the fact that she was the direct cause of somebody's death. John's death. That is, traumatic. So I'm glad that they explored that at the end of this episode, and I'm sure that they will at the beginning of next episode. But I don't know. That's really the big thing for me. Again, Parker's crew, the Hood's crew, I don't hate them. I just don't think they're super memorable, to be quite honest with you. I think that's my big thing with them. And they're no Ant-Man's crew, for example, of Luis and the rest of them. T.I. and Dave Desmalchian's character, I don't quite remember their names, but they're not like that. Memorable. Memorability wise, is that even a word? But I think they're fine, and I think that Anthony Ramos has yet to really show what his character is about. I'm sure based on the tease at the end of this episode, Mephisto, it's obviously Mephisto. I'm interested to see what they do with Mephisto, and again, just hopefully not making it too silly and too goofy. Because, thus far, I think that the Hood as a character, the Hood itself, like the cloak, it just looks a little silly to me. It looks a little bit costumey, Halloween costumey, but again, maybe that's the point. We'll see. It just doesn't look great to me thus far. But, his powers, he turns invisible, he bends bullets. But I just think that we're still on the cusp of really seeing what this show has to offer us. And it's interesting in that regard because it feels like we're just getting started, and yet it feels like we're missing a huge chunk of story. It's this weird dichotomy between the two that I'm not sure what to do with. But I like Dominique Thorne in the role. I think that she does a good job here. I like some of the elements, especially with her stepdad and Natalie and the AI. I think that that's really interesting. I think Zeke I'm warming up to Zeke. I'm interested in Parker. I'm interested to see how Mephisto and magic plays into the rest of the show. I think I'm interested. And I don't know if that's the best place you want to be. By the halfway point of a movie, for example, I don't think you want to be interested. I think you want to be either engaged, or you probably know at that point, I don't really like this movie. But just to be like, yeah, I'm kind of interested. I don't know if that's where you want to be at the halfway point of a movie. So we'll see. All the initial reactions to Ironheart were like the finale. Really good finale. So maybe this show picks it up and has one of the best ending second halves to an MCU show yet. I don't know if I can see it based on this first half, but I'm very open and willing to see where we go from here. So guys, those are my initial thoughts on the first 3 episodes of Ironheart. Spoiler discussion. What did you guys think of the first 3 episodes? Let me know in the comments down below. Are you looking forward to the second half? And yeah, what did you guys think of the first 3 episodes? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, well, anybody hear of this small indie writer, hasn't really done a whole lot in the industry, doesn't have a lot of acclaim to his name or anything like that. This guy named AARON Sorkin. Now, AARON Sorkin, again, I'm being facetious, but for those of you who don't know who AARON Sorkin is, he is, he is one of the greatest writers in Hollywood. I think that is clear. He created and wrote The West Wing, one of my favorite shows of all time, but he's done so many other amazing things as well. One of my favorite films, most underrated films, honestly, of the 2010s was Steve Jobs that he wrote, I believe. Did he direct that? I think David, can't be David Fincher, but somebody famous did a great job directing that. I just can't remember. But he wrote Steve Jobs, and of course, related to Steve Jobs and tech genius biopics, he also wrote The Social Network. And I think The Social Network was, if not mistaken, other than The West Wing, but in terms of movies, because after that, in the 2010s and early 2020s, he's been really directing some high-profile movies himself. So not just writing, but directing them, and also continuing to write some really great features. I also watched Molly's Game a couple years ago, which was really good. I think he directed that. So he is, really one of the greatest writing minds in Hollywood. And The Social Network, like I said, I think was one of the biggest films that really put him on the map in terms of movies, in terms of writing movies. And so, Social Network, right? It's about Facebook. It's about Mark Zuckerberg, played by Jesse Eisenberg, and his early days creating Facebook and what that turned into, Armie Hammer, and all of that wrapped up in that film. And so then years go by, right? It's been a long time since The Social Network came out. And, there have been rumors and rumblings for a while of, are they going to do a Social Network 2? I mean, Mark Zuckerberg is still very young. It has to be said that even when the first Social Network movie came out, he was in his early 30s, late 20s, and now I think he's in his 40s, but he's still very young, relatively speaking. And, it's always weird making biopics about people, real people, especially biopics that are maybe not discussing the more glamorous sides of their lives all the time, which The Social Network definitely did, kind of expose some of the more negative qualities about Mark Zuckerberg. And so, just the idea of doing a part 2, especially with how Facebook has really evolved and come into the national spotlight in, I would wager, mostly a negative way over the last 5 or 10 years, is interesting. And they have now just confirmed that AARON Sorkin is not only going to write, but he's going to direct The Social Network Part 2. This is going to be, this film is going to be based on a new book by Jeff Horowitz, and I say new, it's 2021, but still relatively new, called The Facebook Files. And, it's interesting, right? Because I haven't read the book, obviously. I probably will just wait till The Social Network Part 2 comes out. But again, like I've said before, there's so much that's happened with Facebook over the last 5 or 10 years. And this channel is not here to get into politics. I acknowledge, by the way, there are very real world events going on, and I don't ignore that just because I want to be ignorant. I don't ignore those because I don't care about these kinds of things. I think that there are very real things happening on in the world that we need to pay attention to. That being said, this channel is not a channel for politics and anything like that. So, all those things just as caveats before we discuss The Social Network Part 2, because it's a film about real world events. But everything that happened with Facebook in the 2016 election, everything that's gone on with misinformation about Facebook, going forward with that, and how Zuckerberg has changed and evolved, especially in relation to our current president as well. I think I don't know what the book's about, by the way. I'm assuming it's about all those kinds of things and the alleged hacking schemes and things like that Russia was doing with Facebook in the election, the past couple elections. And I mean, there's just so much to dig into. Again, not to be political, just from a real world perspective. And I'm personally fascinated by what a Social Network Part 2 could do. Like, for example, I think there's an example of if he did, Steve Jobs 2 coming out next year, I'd be like, I guess. I mean, there's still plenty to explore after the what was it? Was it the iPhone launch that they ended that movie on? There's still more to explore before his death, sure. But was that, is that really the richest place of content or story? I don't know. But Facebook, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg as a figure in modern history in modern times, I think is so interesting. So I personally, upon hearing this news, was actually quite excited about this. Not in the sense of, oh, I would love to see this, but just more of, wow, this is going to be such an interesting movie. And I can't wait to see how Sorkin handles it, how he deals with it, and what he comes up with. So I think this is a very interesting thing, and it's something to file away for later. Guys, what do you think about the idea of a Social Network Part 2? I personally am intrigued, but let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, you read the title of this segment, you read the title of this podcast, you read the title of whatever this is, whatever platform you're listening to this on. Let me tell you a couple things up front. Number one, I am not a racing fan. Not to say that I dislike racing inherently, I just never got into it. If you guys have been watching the channel for a long time, I mentioned it once in a while. My sport is baseball, I like football a decent bit as well, and then basketball a little bit here and there. Racing, I just never got into it as a sport. Nothing against it. A little too stressful for me. I mean, we'll talk about how that's portrayed in the film that we're going to be discussing, F1, but, just a little too stressful for me. I mean, the danger and just watching people, again, you can say the same thing about football, for example, but real people, the potential of getting hurt and whatnot, it's a little too much for me. But that being said, just wanted to put that out there. I don't watch Formula One. I don't watch NASCAR. I don't watch any of the racing sports. So that's number one. Number two, though, I'm a big fan of Top Gun Maverick. I have said it before, we even did a review of Top Gun Maverick all the way back when that movie came out. It was a long time ago. I think one of the very first episodes of Access Blockbusters Pod, we did a review of Top Gun Maverick, and I loved it. It was one of the biggest surprises of 2022 in my eyes. I went to go see it because somebody just said, or everyone on the internet was saying, and some of my friends were saying, you just gotta go see it. And I was like, I've never seen the first Top Gun. They were like, doesn't matter, go see it. And it was one of the best theater experiences I have ever had. Just sat there, took it all in, had no expectations for it, and was blown away. And so number three, before we jump into F1, I then became a big fan of whatever Joseph Kosinski was going to do next, the director of Top Gun Maverick. Especially when Joseph Kosinski was announced to be directing basically the racing version of Top Gun Maverick. Instead of planes, instead of Top Gun, it's F1, Formula One racing. And that immediately had my attention. On top of the fact that you get Brad Pitt to be the lead role, and I signed me up. And the trailers looked great. We talked about the trailers throughout the past year or so, and I was very intrigued. And look, I mean, people have been saying in the comments, there's no way this movie makes the amount of money that you predict. Guys, Top Gun Maverick made so much money, and I know that, F1 is not a franchise like Top Gun was, but still, I mean, Top Gun, the amount of years between Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick, it was a lot. There was no guarantee that the nostalgia was going to be there for Top Gun Maverick. Top Gun Maverick made over $1 billion, not just because of the nostalgia, although that was a part of it, but because it was good. And it just captivated audiences. And I don't know. I know a lot of people. I have a lot of friends who are big F1 fans. This sport has a huge fan base. I think, just critical reception aside, this movie's going to make a lot of money. That's my prediction. As the movie comes out, we will see. We'll keep an eye on it as the weeks go by. Obviously, we have to keep track of Superman and Fantastic Four as well, and Jurassic World. But still, I have faith in this movie. But let's get to the movie itself. F1 the movie, starring Brad Pitt, Damson Idris, Javier Bardem, Carrie Condon, and a lot of other amazing actors as well. F1 the movie, this is going to be a non-spoiler review. First of all, we're not going to do spoilers in this review just because I would recommend, if you're watching this review and you haven't seen the movie yet, go out there and watch the movie, and we can have a discussion about it in the comments if you want to talk spoilers. I usually only do spoilers for the big movies that, like, your Avengers Endgames or Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness or Blue Beetles, all the big movies, right? That's when I like to do the spoiler reviews. But I think for movies where, people are kind of on the fence, because generally that's, on this channel, people will come to these kinds of reviews and be like, oh, I'm kind of on the fence. I'll say, go watch the movie, because, guys, I really liked F1. I really, really liked F1. Number one, one of the things immediately that stands out to you is the adrenaline. And that is something where at the beginning of the movie, in the very first few racing segments of this film, I was like, yeah, this is really cool. It's getting me, in the perspective of the racers, and I'm getting to see what's going on. But the first couple driving sequences, I was like, it doesn't quite have that it factor of a Top Gun Maverick, because the very first scene, and it's hard not to compare everything in this movie to Top Gun Maverick because it's the same director and same style and whatnot, but, I feel like sometimes the comparisons they have to be made. And, at the beginning of Top Gun Maverick, right, you have that opening scene with the plane where he's testing out that plane, and they're trying to ground him, right, Tom Cruise, Maverick. And it was just, that set the tone. It was adrenaline pumping, and it was great. This movie, I think, took a little bit to get there. But by the end, and especially at the middle sequence, I'm not going to say what happens there, but there's a middle sequence in the movie that had me on the edge of my seat. And the way that they pace it, the way that they, from beginning to end, it's like this own sequence in the movie, within the movie has its own arc. And it took my breath away, and some of the twists and turns, no pun intended, were fantastic. And by the end of the movie, the racing sequences had just ratcheted up the tension, and I thought that, yeah, this is on par with what we saw from Top Gun Maverick. So, if nothing else, if you don't care about story, you don't care about characters, you don't care about anything else, and you just want to have a good time at the movies, I mean, sold, right? The pacing and the way that Joseph Kosinski is able to do vehicle action and maneuvers is next to none. I mean, granted, I've only seen 2 movies of his, Top Gun Maverick and F1, and they've both been amazing. I don't know what else he could do. Maybe he can do a jet ski movie or a kayaking movie or a crew. I don't know. I'm just thinking about boats. But, I don't know what he could do next. But, I mean, my goodness. It's phenomenal. So, if nothing else, it's a great just summer movie just to see the racing and the action. And I'm saying this. This is why I preface all of this early on in the podcast. I'm saying this as somebody who doesn't enjoy, or doesn't watch, rather, or doesn't regularly watch F1 or racing sports. And I was still captivated. There were some POV shots where you get a real sense of being inside the car. A lot of just great perspective and angles and sound design. I saw it in Dolby at the AMC, and it was fantastic. So, sound design as well. All of that stuff, really, really well done. On top of that, though, I think one of the strengths of this movie is actually the character work that's done. Brad Pitt's character, Sonny Hayes, you really, I mean, first of all, Brad Pitt is Brad Pitt, and he's charismatic as always, and he does a great job, because this is a role built for Brad Pitt, the kind of snarky jerk who has a heart of gold and wants to do the right thing, but also is conflicted. I mean, that's the stereotypical Brad Pitt kind of character, right? He nails it. He nails it. He has to be, he can be arrogant when he has to be, he can be snarky when he has to be, but he can also be selfless when he has to be, selfish when he has to be. It works so well for him. This is, again, I just think if you were to build a role for Brad Pitt in a lab, this is one of them. He does a great job. Damson Idris. Now, just a sidebar for a little bit, because, I know a lot of you guys who are watching this review are probably also interested in Marvel and what's been going on with Avengers Doomsday. I know that there was some concept art that seemed to indicate Damson Idris was going to be the next Black Panther. We talked about how his comments might have indicated maybe he could be the next Black Panther, T'Challa. And I mean, it's impossible for me not to have that in the back of my mind, because it's just relevant. It's just what's going on. And at the beginning, right? So Damson Idris' character, without going into detail, plays the foil to Brad Pitt, and they're teammates, and they go through their lumps and whatnot. It's kind of a tried and true trope, right? But it works. It works really well. And at the beginning of the film, I was kind of thinking, if he were to play T'Challa ever, or if he were to play the King of Wakanda, or if he were to play Black Panther, I don't know. Don't quite see it. Granted, I know he's playing a character, and I know that this is the only thing I've really ever seen him in, but still, just the vibe didn't seem to fit. But then there was a moment towards the end where it kind of clicked for me. And I think it was just the way he was talking and the way that, the character had progressed to a certain point, that I kind of looked at him at the end and I was like, oh, I kind of see it, actually. There was, again, not going through anything in specific, in detail. Obviously, this is non-spoiler, but it's character growth, right? Characters go through a journey in the movie, and the character growth that this character goes through, Damson Idris's character. By the end of the movie, I was like, I actually, this, the version of the character at the end of the movie, I was like, I can kind of see it. So that's a whole sidebar. All that to say, I think he does a really good job playing those two different sides of the characters. Again, it's a very interesting character where he has to play foil to Brad Pitt, but also they're on the same team, and all of those conflicts, that come about with that. Javier Bardem, great as always. Carrie Condon, it's impossible for me not to hear Friday, Tony Stark's AI voice. Every time she talks, I'm like, yep, that's that's Tony Stark's AI. But no, she does a great job as well. Really, one of the great things about this movie is that they build a team that you're rooting for. They really invest you not just in the racing, but also in the team itself, which I think is hugely important. The interpersonal relationships between some of these characters are great as well. And, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, with these kinds of movies where there's sports adjacent movies, or even Top Gun Maverick, it's not really a sports movie, but it has those same tropes. They're tried and true, right? They're not gonna, you know, break the mold and do something crazy. You know, they're not gonna really break away from those stereotypes of the underdog and rooting for these people, and they go through their trials and tribulations, and do they come out on top at the end and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, Brad Pitt's playing the character that's past his prime. Can he do it? You know, these are all things that we've seen before. So, you know, it's not just purely on concept that I talk about this movie being really good. The execution has to work. And this movie really executes on that concept. You know, same thing with Top Gun Maverick, right? I mean, how many times have we seen this before, right? The guy has passed his prime, has to train some new recruits. I mean, guys, I mean, it's the same general premise for both of those movies. But they both execute on them really, really well. I really enjoy this movie. I'm not going to say, as of right now, this is my favorite movie of the year, but it is up there. I mean, in terms of theater experience, oh yeah, it's definitely up there. Again, I wouldn't say it was as good as my theater experience with Top Gun Maverick, even though I fully admit part of that is just because I was surprised by Top Gun Maverick, and I don't think I was expecting really good things from F1 based on what Top Gun Maverick did. So, again, I think that this movie, it really had great action. It really had great style and pace and tone, good characters, good acting. It's a great movie. I was going to say it's a great summer movie. It doesn't have to be a summer movie. I think it's just a great movie. And I would highly recommend you go check it out. Guys, have you seen F1, the movie? Are you a fan of F1 and have you seen the movie? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. And if you're not a fan of F1 like myself, what did you think of the movie? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, a franchise that I don't often talk about on the Access Blockbusters pod or the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel is James Bond. It is one of my admitted blind spots in terms of pop culture. I don't think I've really seen a James Bond movie in full. That being said, it is definitely high on the list. And of course, before the next Bond comes out, Bond 25, I believe. That's not the official title, obviously. I think it's the 25th Bond film. But I will, of course, at least try to watch the Daniel Craig movies for sure. But, you know, I know a lot about them and about the character and whatnot. So I'm definitely familiar with that on a surface level. And James Bond is one of the iconic franchises that really transcends time. If you think about it, it's based on the Ian Fleming novels. But, of course, all the different iterations of James Bond, you know, you got Roger Moore and, of course, Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig most recently, and a lot of buzz has been going around. I mean, you know, recently with the whole Amazon completely buying out James Bond, which has, you know, caused a little bit of a stir, but then also just in general, you know, talking about who the next James Bond will be. I mean, a lot of people are fan casting Aaron Taylor Johnson, for example, Henry Cavill, Taron Egerton. So, you know, a lot of buzz around James Bond, and especially once Daniel Craig stepped down from the role. And now we actually have our first big concrete piece of news surrounding the next James Bond movie, which I don't even know if it has a cast or a story, or if we've even cast the next James Bond, but we do have a pivotal piece to this puzzle, and that is the director. And it's exciting enough for me. If it was a completely unknown director, I might have been like, yeah, maybe we'll talk about this later on in a different segment. But this is big enough for me. And even as somebody who, again, just hasn't really been involved or invested in the James Bond franchise, gets me excited about this. Because none other than Dune and Dune Part 2 director, as well as Arrival, Prisoners director Denis Villeneuve, will be directing the next James Bond movie. And this is official. It's not even Hollywood Reporter, Variety, Deadline official, which, you know, I would put it about an 85-90%. This is completely official. Denis Villeneuve has spoken about this. He says, quote, "I grew up watching James Bond films with my father, even since Dr. No with Sean Connery. I'm a diehard Bond fan." So this is official. I mean, first of all, just on a complete side note, what this implies to me, unless he's a complete just one and done, in terms of the James Bond films, which I find hard to believe. I don't know if they're going to do another 5 or 7 films, but I'd find it hard to believe he'd just do one. I would think at least 1 or 2, right? So what this confirms to me, first of all, and this is just a complete tangent, like I said, he will not be directing Dune 4, but based on the 3rd book, whatever. There have been rumors and other things swirling around that, of course, they want to continue the Dune franchise. I think we have, is it Children of Dune or God Emperor of Dune or whatever is next after Dune Messiah, which I've read Dune Messiah, but not anything after that. But I know the franchise kind of gets weird after the second book, and Denis Villeneuve has always stated he really wanted to just make the trilogy of Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2, adhering to the original book, the original first book, and then Dune Messiah, which is Dune Part 3, that he's going to be filming later on in this year. So that confirms to me that, his full attention is now going to be on James Bond, which on the one hand is a bummer, not because I don't think he'd do a great job with James Bond, but because I'd like for him to have maybe done a Marvel movie, a DC movie, a Star Wars movie, but, he's not maybe that kind of director. His big sci-fi tentpole has been Dune, and now he's dipping his toe into the James Bond franchise. But I think it's super, super exciting because Denis Villeneuve is one of those people, rare filmmakers in Hollywood, and there aren't that many, right? There are not that many. Steven Spielberg comes to mind. RYAN Coogler comes to mind, who really put their artistry at the forefront, but are able to make blockbuster, mass appeal movies while still keeping their integrity, keeping their focus on the artwork, on the art itself. And I think that is super important when it comes to James Bond, just like with any franchise, of keeping it not just being a spectacle, not getting goofy, and again, no one said that James Bond is, can't be fun. But the more recent James Bond films were very dark, more dark at least than some of the other iterations. But I think that it's with a franchise as big as James Bond, having a director who is so dedicated to his craft, but also so in love with the pop culture, and with franchises, I think is such a beautiful mesh. And I think that, again, him, RYAN Coogler, Steven Spielberg come to mind. I'm sure I'm missing tons of others. James Cameron, who are able to really balance, the big scale with the small moments. And I think that that's really exciting. So I am personally, my interest in this next James Bond film went up exponentially upon hearing this news. And I think that this is going to be exciting. And the next step now obviously is going to be who's going to be James Bond. And then we'll get some details, I'm sure, about the release date and story and schedule and whatnot. So very exciting news. Guys, what do you think about Denis Villeneuve being the next director for the next James Bond movie? And let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, I know this isn't breaking news anymore by the time you're listening to this segment, and that's just because of the way that I record these podcast episodes. Long story, you can go check out other segments I've made where I discuss how I schedule these podcast segments and how I'm able to record them, and basically the podcast gets locked on Fridays, and sometimes news just comes out on Friday afternoon after the podcast is locked, and there's not a whole lot I can do about it. So, this isn't breaking news, but I do think, now that we've had some time to sit on it, this is interesting, and I want to dive deeper into this. I want to dive deeper into the news that Jon Bernthal, Punisher, is going to appear in Spider-Man Brand New Day. I think this has so many interesting implications to it, and frankly, we won't know until we see a trailer or hear a premise of what this movie even is, because there have been so many alleged leaks and scoops, even from the same people, honestly, which is, again, this is my big pitch to you guys. I also follow some of these scoopers and leakers, not because I believe everything that they say. In fact, it's actually because I don't believe everything that they say. But you just have to take them with a grain of salt, right? You just have to. A lot of these leaks, Mr. Negative is in the movie. And then, Null is in the movie. And, Madam Web is not that. But you know what I mean? Like, there have been so many leaks and rumors about the villains of Spider-Man Brand New Day and Tombstone and Scorpion. And it's like, okay, let's back up here. And let's wait until these sources, the Hollywood Reporter in this case, breaks the news, because the Hollywood Reporter is one of those sources that you can reliably trust about these kinds of things. And so I'm going to read just a little bit here. There's not a whole lot from this article other than the breaking news. But then I want to talk about what this really means for the MCU. So let's read from this Hollywood Reporter article. Jon Bernthal, this is quoting the article, quote, Jon Bernthal has appeared in several Marvel television series as the stone-cold vigilante known as the Punisher, even headlining his own series. Now, he's taking his guns to the big screen. Bernthal has joined Tom Holland in Spider-Man Brand New Day, the latest Spider-Man movie from Sony and Marvel. Destin Daniel Cretton is directing the feature, which will shoot in England this summer and has a July 31st, 2026 release date. Much of the movie remains shrouded in mystery. Movie rumor websites have listed upwards of a dozen possible villains. That's what I'm talking about. It's like they can't all be true. These leaks can't all be true. This is just me. This is just an aside. For all those people who are like, maybe the movie's been changing this whole time and they don't have a script and whatnot, I buy the idea that maybe they don't have a concrete script or they're working out the last little bits here. They know what the story is. Destin Daniel Cretton at CinemaCon said they were doing concept art and they were looking at suit designs. They know what the story is. So it's all of these rumors and leaks can't all be true. That's all I'm saying. Getting back to the article here, quote, from crime bosses to alien symbiotes who could appear in the future, as well as a couple of different rumors, a couple different versions of the Hulk. Again, another rumor that I haven't really talked about because it's mostly just been scoopers that have been talking about it. And then here's another interesting tidbit. Quote, the only thing clear at this stage is that Zendaya and JACOB Batalon, so that's news, Ned, are reprising their roles as MJ and best friend Ned, although how substantial those roles will be remains unclear, and Stranger Things star Sadie Sink is the big new addition so far. The story takes place after the events of the previous film Spider-Man No Way Home, in which, yes, yada yada yada, confirming all of the things that we knew already. So, let's talk about this. Number one, the inclusion of Jon Bernthal's Punisher is big for Marvel in one way. It is bringing another television character to the big screen. Now, the last time this happened in the MCU was with Monica Rambeau and Ms. Marvel. And frankly, in terms of results, right, not even talking about quality, I really love Kamala Khan. I really love Iman Vellani. I think she's great. And I thought that Teyonah Parris was fine as Monica Rambeau. It's not quality, it's just results. The movie tanked. It bombed. And one could argue that there are malicious factors going on with a lot of hatred going on in the world with Ms. Marvel and Captain Marvel and Monica Rambeau, and that's terrible. One could also say that, it just wasn't a great film. Those are factors as well. I would argue, though, one of the big factors as to why the movie bombed was because they brought Disney Plus characters, and also the MCU, the state of the MCU as well, but they brought Disney Plus characters into the big screen. This is really one of the biggest problems because if you're going to have all the young Avengers, for example, in Avengers Doomsday, you have a lot of explaining to do. Every time you bring an established television character into the movies, you have a lot of explaining to do. Now, I think Marvel knows this at this point and is still comfortable bringing Punisher on into Spider-Man Brand New Day. What this indicates to me is that they have a plan to bring him into the movie that makes it so that you don't have to know any of his backstory in the previous films, and you can just go in cold knowing who Punisher is. I have a feeling that Punisher in this movie then is going to be more of an agent of chaos than anything else. I think that this movie, right, as long as given that this is the first big appearance of another TV character transitioning into the movies post the Marvels, given that that's the case, I think this movie will be a big litmus test as to how successful the strategy is going to be and whether or not Marvel has figured out a way to do it so that audience members don't feel isolated at this point in time. I think that this is going to be a really big litmus test in that regard. So, there's that. It's big for Marvel. It's big for Jon Bernthal as Punisher because, again, this version of the character, Jon Bernthal's a movie star as well. He's going to be in The Odyssey. It was just in The Accountant 2. But this Punisher has not been on the big screen thus far. He's only been on television. So we're doing our rewatch of the Defender Saga, which now seems even more salient than ever before. And this is going to be big for the Punisher as a character. What does it say about the story in particular? Well, it seems to indicate that there will be some grounded elements at the very least to this movie because sure, I mean, you could have a story where Punisher is fighting some bigger threats. I mean, all the Avengers were in Avengers Infinity War, for example, and some grounded characters like Bucky and whatnot. So, sure. I mean, it's possible in Falcon and War Machine, right? But, I mean, Punisher is such a street-level character. You have to imagine that a big part of this movie is going to be street-level. Does this mean Daredevil is going to show up? The chances just went up, right? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if in a week we didn't get a report that Charlie Cox was joining the cast of Spider-Man Brand New Day. That would be super exciting, right? We know that based on recent reports from Vincent D'Onofrio, apparently Kingpin can't show up in movies, which sucks. It's a bummer. But, it's possible, right? The only reason that I would think otherwise at this point is because it's kind of odd that they'd report on Jon Bernthal showing up in Spider-Man Brand New Day and not Charlie Cox at the same time, or you wouldn't report on Charlie Cox first if you found that out. I don't know. I mean, one would think that if you're breaking this news, you'd look into Charlie Cox as well and see, okay, is Charlie Cox going to appear in Spider-Man Brand New Day as well? And you would have the answer for that. So it just makes me think that, they did look into that and there's nothing there so far. We'll see. And, I think that it's, again, what's the story of this movie going to be? I don't know, but it seems like, again, Ned and MJ are there, so something street level seems reasonable. Jon Bernthal is joining the cast. Sadie Sink, who knows who she's going to be? But it's a big deal because I think it's just building the excitement of, okay, we have an understanding of what the story is, or we're getting an understanding of what the story is. I don't. And I know it's ironic because I run a whole YouTube channel about reading into people's comments and reviewing things. But, I don't love to... What I don't want to do is just read way too far into things that it's just ridiculous, right? I want to be clear-headed about things and whatnot. And so I'm trying to be, right? I do think, though, that this news, you can read a good bit into it about, okay, what's the scale of the story, what the role of it is, what this means for Marvel Television, what this could mean for Daredevil. I think that this, at the very least, increases the possibility that Daredevil appears on the big screen sometime soon. Again, we're going to have to see how they thread the needle of introducing a only television character into the big screen again, because it didn't work so well last time. So we'll see about that, but I'm optimistic, and I think this is a really, really exciting thing for us Marvel fans. Guys, what do you make of the news that Punisher, and also Ned's showing up, Punisher Jon Bernthal will be appearing in Spider-Man Brand New Day in some capacity? Let me know in the comments down below. And guys, thank you so much for joining us again. That'll do it for me for episode 84 of the Access Blockbusters pod. I hope you guys, if you are in the United States, have a safe and happy 4th of July as well holiday, spending time with family and friends out there. Enjoy the fireworks. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to subscribe again. Road to 2,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel and also on the audio-only platforms. Again, like I always say, those platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast, are where the podcast is posted first Saturday mornings in its entirety. So if you want to check out the entire thing and not have to wait for the YouTube version later on, then check it out over there. That will do it for me from this episode of the Access Blockbusters pod, and I will see you guys in the next one.